So we must do two things, two great things together, to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. So we are in the fourth day of principle, and we have just looked at principle as soul, the subtone of soul, and recapping that epitome that in divine metaphysics, the greater rules the lesser, thereby bringing out harmony. So what we have seen really is how that one principle is operating, is expressing itself, manifesting itself as a system of light, a system of divine metaphysics, and showing itself forth really as one great holarchy of government. We said that in principle as mind, there was the fiat, the command to let there be a divine system of metaphysics. In principle as spirit, having seen that that system is comprised of the signs and seasons, days and years of God's creating, of mind's creating, that we let this be translated to every level of understanding, that we see that it is translated to every level of understanding. In a way, principle as mind has a touch of the Word in it, and principle as spirit has a touch of the Christ in it. You get the translatability, the enlightening of the understanding, the greater light and the lesser light. We said that it's there that we see that the structure of understanding and the structure of being are the same, that there is that sense of isomorphy, of being one with our principle in such a way that we are structured in the same way. We are of the same form as our principle. We've called that really being divinely self-organized, becoming organized like our principle.
And what part is spirit in that? I didn't totally hear the spirit part.
What part would be spirit? Apparently it's a good question. Reflection, yes, reflection. If you have that isomorphy, if you have that likeness of understanding, what is understanding? Spirit. It's a reflection in the understanding.
Do signs and seasons have anything to do with spirit?
This is in mind. Principle is mind, is where you had really the basics of the system set forth. You remember that in the principle as mind, that you had the let there be, what was it now? Lights in the firmament of heaven. To divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. It's there that you really get your basic elements. Again, a touch of the Word, right? Basic elements of the system. Then we see how the Christ translates that system to every level of understanding, reflects it in the understanding. The greater light and the lesser light, giving light upon the earth. Yeah. And then principle as soul, that once there is that understanding, if it is understood, that light really is ruling. It's ruling within us. It's ruling actually all realms. There's no realm in which we don't experience the rule of that principle, the rule of divine metaphysics. If we talk about realms, what is this, calculus-wise? Christianity, yes. So, it's governing every realm. And now what do we see in the second record? Principle, taking the main epitome again, just to remind ourselves, is all about animal magnetism, not about that divine principle, but about the claim against principle. Animal magnetism disrupts the relationship of God and man. We've just seen that beautiful relationship of God and man, or principle and idea, in the fourth day through the first three subtones. And now we come to principle as soul. Animal magnetism disidentifies man from God and thus tries to disrupt divine system and relationship. So we have the following. Therefore shall a man, and what did we just finish with in the preceding? We had the rib taken out of Adam, didn't we? That sense of disrupting the integrity to that extent of that separability, really countering the inseparability of God and man. We had a distorted sense of self-reproduction, that out of Adam would be taken a fragment. Out of that system would come a fragment. And we had that marvelous reference to mental midwifery. You recall that? And we were looking at that sense of the bringing forth of man, how that was undergoing an ascending sense under the impact of the translation of the Christ idea, that man would then be born of woman instead of woman being born of man. You see that this is the distortion in the second record. It says woman is born of man, and then a mortal thought undergoes a retranslation process. The first thing that happens is that there is the belief that man is born of woman. And then finally she says another change will come as to the nature and origin of man. And this revelation will destroy the dream of existence, reinstate reality, usher in science and the glorious fact of creation, that both man and woman proceed from God and are his eternal children, belonging to no lesser parent. So we left the second record at that point, and now we see that something else is coming in. It says, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother. You see how it picks up with the opposite of what has been set forth as a positive fact, as the true fact of reality in principle as spirit. A man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife. So you have that breaking apart again, that separating, breaking up that true relationship between God and man as the sense of the true father-mother. And they, meaning the man and his wife, shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, and the man and his wife were not ashamed. So it's the claim really too that man now leaves father and mother in order to rule over woman. Not so that there's not the sense of being under God's government, being equally under God's government, but leaving God's government to rule over the other individual. Mrs. Eddy says, the only father and mother is the Father, Mother, God. Man shall cleave unto his wife. Man identifies himself with a mortal creation, with his own mortal creation, with what he has created. Whereas the true identification is that both man and woman proceed from God and are his eternal children, belonging to no lesser parent. That's really what we just saw. And it says that both were naked. This is certainly a state of nakedness, but they were not ashamed because they didn't know. They had not eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil yet. They were not even aware that they were naked. They didn't recognize sin as yet. We're in principle as soul. There's no recognition of sin as yet. So you have a kind of a blindness. Sometimes we call this an innocence, but it isn't an innocence. It's ignorance. It's a form of ignorance. And it shows the attempt to now bring these two halves together, these two parts together, and to make them one. The attempt to make male and female one, two people one. Whenever you try to make two people become one, this is what Mrs. Eddy calls in miscellaneous writings the divorcing of two minds into one. And this is, isn't that good? The divorcing of two minds into one. Miscellaneous writings 289. So two halves do not make one whole in divine science. And this is a naked state. She says, if man is one with God, he has a right relationship with other men. You see, what we need is our oneness with God, our weddedness to God. We need to be wed to the Father, Mother. Isn't that interesting? Not to another person. Wed to that Father, Mother, God, and in proportion as we are wed to that principle, that Father, Mother, God as principle, our relationship is right to every other one, every other individual. Yes. And the learning of this is built into every relationship. It comes, every relationship comes fully outfitted with this lesson. So that we can't miss learning that lesson in life. And this is success, isn't it? To learn that. That you cannot leave your principle. That you must find your completeness and your own infinite gender in your relationship to principle as the offspring of the Father, Mother, and therefore within yourself. We're still in the Word as the Christ.
Is that being naked is not being one with your principle, do you think?
I think not being naked is a sign and effect. It shows you, it's a showing forth or an expression of the fact that you are not one.
Right.
Yeah.
With your principle.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. To take this to every relationship, that is then bringing out harmony. Okay. So we go on to principle as principle. Divine metaphysics interprets all in the divine light. So we are back to the first record of creation, and what do we find there? And God set them in the firmament of heaven. Set what? The lights, huh? This holarchy, this, if you want to call it a hierarchy, but actually the sense of hierarchy is going out as we come into the 7,000-year period. We find that a hierarchy, that term is replaced by holarchy, because at every point where you seem to have a part, you have the whole in expression. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, as we have said and seen, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Now everything there is the same as what we have seen before, except that it says that he set them in the firmament of heaven. Everything else is, so to say, repetitive. This is such a big point, this sense of being set in the firmament of heaven. It's all to do with place value. With place value, that everything has its place value. Every value has its place, and it is a fixed place, immovably fixed. And this seems to be paradoxical, that something would be immovably fixed in that system and yet be continually moving, continually relating to the whole universe in a new way. I think this is what they mean by the precession. Would you know, Inky, when
the equinoxes?
The precession of the equinoxes? Yes, that everything is fixed. What they call the cycle of cycles is the precession of the equinoxes, and that has to do with the fact that the sun gradually shifts its position just little by little each year until after about 2,000 years it begins the year begins, the new year begins in a different sign. Is that right?
Level of consciousness.
Yeah,
Actually.
yeah. In a different sign. You can hear it's a continual progression and precession, maybe you want to say, of the sense of demonstration, how demonstration is continually moving. It isn't repetitive. It's always has that sense of newness about it. Those 12 are continually moving, and yet everything is fixed. I was talking to you about that true sense of astrology, and they refer to the heavens, they refer to the celestial universe as a heavenly book showing forth this Messiah depiction. And it's interesting, too, that there is, according to the Companion Bible, and that's a marvelous Bible. I know some of you have it. It's the Bible that John Dorley, or one of the Bibles that John Dorley refers to in his works on the science of the Bible as a reference. And it is there that they say that the Sphinx was invented as a memorial to this very thing of the precession of the equinoxes. The Sphinx had the head of a woman and the body and tail of a lion. Now you have to know there are a lot of of theories about what the Sphinx is and what the Sphinx is all about and what it really symbolizes. But this is so beautiful because it says that it has the head of a woman and the body of a lion, in order to show really this great cycle, this sense of a cybernetic circle of relationship, that head of a woman is the sign of Virgo, stands for the sign of Virgo, from which we have the term virgin, you see, the virgin, and that then the tail is the sign of Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Yes, as Jesus was said to come from the tribe of Judah, which was the symbolized by the lion. So, and that this term Sphinx is from the Greek sphingo, meaning to join, because it binds together the two ends of this circle of the heavens. Isn't that beautiful? Gives you kind of a great overall sense of that cybernetic cycle of demonstration, of the principle of one principle demonstrating itself cybernetically, and then within that cycle are the other values, other cycles, as we said, the 12 of the zodiac, and also within that the 4 seasons and the 7 days and the sense of the one. So why did I say that? Because we're talking about everything being fixed in the firmament of heaven. And without that fixedness, you wouldn't have these relationships. You wouldn't have the continuity of them. Yes.
One thing to elaborate on what you're using, fixed. The fixed is the calculus every 2,000 years. The other signs mutate and overform. But the 4 signs that become the cross, the logo for that 2,000 years, is fixed. Those 4. And that's the calculus of the cosmos. We don't call it the zodiac when it gets to that point.
Yeah, what do you call it then?
Cosmos.
Cosmos. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. So as everything is moving, every 2,000 years there's a shift in what those 4
Fixed.
accentuations are.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
The word Christ, Christianity, and science become that logos at that time. And it's interesting because it overforms. It's really, I'm so excited that you're bringing this in, Sue, because no one else has done that. But in my early education, that was very helpful to understand what you're saying now. And one of the books that you all can get that's difficult to get, but it's called From Pioneer to Poet by Isabel Pagan, P-A-G-A-N. It's probably an English writer in the 18th century, wrote the most exact interpretation of what Sue is giving.
What was the name?
From Pioneer to Poet.
Thank you. But you see how beautiful that is, that sense of being set in the firmament of heaven, because without this we could have no reliable relationships. The relationships are reliable, that everything moves, but everything moves together, and each is in a fixed relationship to its principle and to everything within the system. And that is bringing out the...
Just one other thing.
Yeah.
This never contradicts anything that you're learning in Christian Science. It only supports it. Because the light, which is behind the sun, which is one of the charts that Sue did many years ago on the matrix, the light above the science level, remember? You don't have it?
I don't remember, no.
Is that which is fixed. And then that descends to the human or Christian science and translates and retranslates itself to always reestablish its origin.
She understands that better than we do. She knows that of which she speaks.
Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yes.
The part about because these are fixed, that's the only reason why we can have a reliable relationship with others. I don't quite.
Well, if you think of your system, if everything is going to move around in the 7 and the 4 and the 4, it's not reliable, is it? You know, if the order is going to change, if the word order is going to change every time I look at it, or the word is going to relate differently to the Christ, if the Christ comes in the 3rd position instead of the 2nd. See, these are all place values that don't change. Yeah, and the whole of the system with its categories and classifications within the categories are one. They're one thing. They are the one system of principle. And we talked about before not being able to take something out of that system. And in a way, this is the same thing in a perhaps a little bit higher way, that we would see that those categories must be fixed. And they have to be fixed also within us. They have to be set within our consciousness, don't they? The system has to be set through understanding in our consciousness, and then we experience the harmonious relationships of them. And I just feel that 5th tone coming in, because I can hardly keep from saying that what comes out are periods of progress. That what the system brings out is the progression of life. It's a progression. Yeah. So it's not that we're astrologists. We're divine scientists.
See, that's the lowest level, Sue. You don't even use astrology at that level, the term, because it's a sacred, stellar lore. L-O-R-E.
Sacred, stellar lore.
Yeah, and it's a very sacred
Oh, you can
logos.
You can feel that, sense that in when you're reading that appendix in the Companion Bible. I know you have the Companion Bible. Have you looked at that? Well, anyway, there's such a spiritual sense, such a spirituality that one senses behind it, and a great awe for the workings of the Christ idea. And everything there just bears out the true system, the one system of principle. So here we see that the marginal heading is that darkness is scattered. Did we say divine metaphysics interprets all in divine light? Don't know if we took that or not. Oh gosh, we should have, huh? Divine metaphysics interpreting all in divine light. Boy, it's almost better to take the epitome later. We have to build up the tone, huh? Yeah. That in divine science, she says, which is the seal of deity, that this seal of deity has the impress of heaven. Oh boy. And God is revealed as infinite light. In the eternal mind, no night is there. You see the reference to mind taking us back to the origin of the light. So all is light, and everything is interpreted in the divine light, in the light of principle, in the light of science. This is where we are going. This is the evolution within our own consciousness, isn't it? To come to that standpoint of being able to interpret everything in the light of divine science, everything in the light of the system. You know that a seal, I've always loved that sense of the seal, divine science being the seal of deity. A seal is a stamp of authority, of course, and it bears the design or emblem of itself and imprints everything with itself. That's what divine science is doing. It imprints the whole universe with itself. And we only need the eyes to see that. We only need the eyes of mind, spirit, soul, principle, and life, truth, and love to see the real universe. It's right here. It isn't somewhere else. We don't have to get rid of this. There's nothing we have to get rid of. But what has to be established is the standpoint of divine science as consciousness, you see. And that comes forth as we are true to and as we are impelled by the ideal and the fulfillment of life, truth, and love. That is the authority of divine science, as though divine science would say, would stamp everything, and that stamping, you know, was also not only an authenticating, but a sign of ownership, as though to say, this is mine. Everything is mine. I stamp everything with divine science. What do we have in the second record? Principle as principle. We see how animal magnetism misinterprets God to man. Back we are in the dust of the ground. Here comes the lowliest creature of those animal tendencies, animal qualities. And now we have the serpent. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. What a drop, huh? Can you feel the drop? And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? So we have this, we're actually right at the crux of the whole development of that creative order, principle as principle. And here we have the calling into doubt of God's word. This is what is before us. What is the word of God? So it is a talking serpent, a lying serpent. Mrs. Eddy says a mythical serpent standing for animal magnetism that would try to mesmerize, try to hypnotize, try to suggest another interpretation, but the interpretation of principle. Would try to suggest even going to something else or away from God for another interpretation. So this is a very crucial point. Mrs. Eddy says, in old scriptural pictures, we see a serpent coiled around the tree of knowledge, coiled around the tree of knowledge, and speaking to Adam and Eve. This represents the serpent in the act of commending to our first parents the knowledge of good and evil. So it's the tempting, you know. Are you sure you don't want to try it out? Are you sure you don't you want to be God? Don't you want to be a little God? You see, why should God be God? So up comes this suggestion. I love that sense of a spiral. Gee, we had that cybernetic sense, didn't we, in the true record there of that Virgo and Leo symbolizing the binding together of that whole sense of demonstration, that continuous round of demonstration. And here with the serpent, you have that spiraling sense, a circling around sense, and the serpent is really symbolizing the counterfeit of that true loop, of that real loop effect. The loop not understood in its onlyness, in its principle, in its system. A spiral is a circling continuously around a point or center, coiled or coiling in one plane. That's interesting, in one plane. Coiling in constantly changing planes, also it is described as. So it's almost as though the biblical writers could see or must have sensed that this would symbolize the opposite of that true spiral, that true circle, that cycling of the divine system in all of its diversity. That's the second record. It's animal magnetism, subtle, self-dealing, trying to split up the idea, tries to supervise things, to supervise with its person, its sense of person, the idea, calculating how it will achieve its ends, and surreptitiously trying to lead Adam and Eve into the partaking of the tree of knowledge. Well, go ahead. Just go right ahead. It's all in the plan. It's all in the design. So that we're never really being used by a second reality, by another reality. But that everything there is in the design for the disclosing, the uncovering of that illusion as unreal. So we are just under the workings of that divine principle, love, which is going to establish in us the true system, the true sense of God, God as a principle. So we're really shown by principle as principle that we must interpret every situation, that we are being led to interpret every situation from the standpoint of principle, that we are fixed in the firmament of heaven, that in divine science God is revealed as infinite light, and that it is this light and the consciousness of this light that is interpreting everything aright to us. So we can go then to principle as life. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And it is here that Mrs. Eddy again goes beyond the biblical text. She doesn't say a great deal, but she says just enough to make it clear that this is principle as life, that principle is life. That principle that you have been looking at, have been considering through the first four subtones, now is life. She says the changing glow and full effulgence. You hear the light. You hear these are shades of light, degrees of light. The changing glow and full effulgence of God's infinite ideas, images, mark the periods of progress. I just love that, and I love the symbol, I love even the symbol of it, that progression is continually brought out by that divine system of reference. And so our epitome is that divine metaphysics brings progressive interpretations. These are the periods of progress. A period is not a measure of time. It is the, what would you say, the expression of categories in relationship. Principle bringing out its categories in a certain relationship, or bringing out the accentuation, say, of a period of mind, a period of spirit, of soul, a period of the Word, or a period of the Christ, of Christianity and science. That these are the periods, in a way, that we're dealing with. They are the categories. They are the categories, and categories in relationship. What do we have with the second record? Principle as life. It's animal magnetism. Again, it's the serpent again. Now this misinterpretation, see, we have just seen that animal magnetism misinterprets God to man. You get the feeling with that misinterpretation that there isn't an isomorphy, but that there's that distortion, as though that the suggestion would be there not to be isomorphic with one's principle. To say, I think I know a better way. I think I have a better way of working. It's where we would turn to something other than God, to another system, to another so-called science, to an ism or an ology, to something other than divine science. And so all that's implied in that tone of principle as principle, where the serpent says to the woman, "Yea, hath God said?" You see that doubt? You hear that? Doubt is causing you to doubt. Maybe science doesn't work. Maybe Christian Science didn't work. Maybe this isn't the demonstration of science, or I haven't made the demonstration of science. How can I make the demonstration of science? What is God? Is there a better God than the one I have? Maybe I can be my own God, you see. It's not that isomorphy of principle as principle within us. And now we have seen that when we are isomorphic with principle, when we are one with principle in the same nature and structure, that we cannot experience anything but progress. The progress that principle, that science brings out. And here it is different. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And so there is the sense that of what will happen if we make this move, if we take this move, is not a sense of life. You see, there's a little touch of something right there. There's a little touch that says, if we eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if that becomes our God and we become gods, that we're going to die. Something will die in us. See? Whereas we've just seen that to be one with that principle of science through its categories brings forth the infinite progression of life. Yeah. So we get a little touch, of the hesitation, it's the woman. It's the woman, and we'll see later that it's the woman who is able to trace evil back to animal magnetism. So it's all left at that point in the fourth tone of the second record, that this is a leading question now. Are we going to eat of this tree or not? Yes, Mrs. Eddy speaks of the Adam story there. She says, Adam increases in falsehood. That's the increase that is going on in the second record. His days become shorter. Interesting. The days become shorter. But in divine science, man is sustained by the divine principle of being. At God's command, the earth brings forth food for man's use. Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink. The Father and Mother of all is able to feed and clothe man as he doth the lilies. He keeps going back to that Father, Mother. Yeah, that's a great, great point. All right. So, we have just two subtones left in the tone of the word as the Christ. You realize that? We've been in the word as the Christ. And now we move to the fifth day of life. That fifth day of life. And we're fast approaching then the new breaking in of that third break. Actually, it's a second break, but it's the third aspect that comes in the word as Christianity. So we are moved on. You see how principle as life, principle being life, moves us right into life, right into the fifth day of creation. And we'll see that life in the fifth day is falling back mainly on the second day. Remember, we saw that the fourth day falls back on the first day, the light of the first day. Now the fifth day turns back on the second day, on the firmament of heaven, the waters, those waters that are ordered by the firmament of spirit, begin to refer to themselves. They are becoming self-reproducing. The waters become self-reproductive, bringing forth something new from what is already there, from that which is already there. So it will be the moving creature that hath life. In life, we see so much about individuality now. In soul, we saw that every idea has identity. Every idea has a definite identity. In principle, that these identities have place values, that they are set in the firmament of heaven within the whole system of metaphysics. Each idea has its own place value. Now, life is going to show us something about the individuality of that fact. And life will always fall back on principle. Life is nothing else but, there's a good reductionist statement, life is nothing but mind, spirit, soul, principle. Yeah. Mind, spirit, soul, principle. And so what we see about individuality, you see, we can't start with the fifth day. We can't start with that individuality of life. Individuality is not something per se. In other words, it is actually principle restructuring itself. It's the whole system restructuring itself. This is the individuality of life. And therefore, every restructuring and restructuring of principle brings that principle out, shows that principle forth, expresses that principle in a new way. This is life. And therefore, individuality is the principle, the one principle, at an individual point of calculation. You hear the correlation with principle as life, periods of progress, that there's a leading right into the fifth day of creation now, that we would see what the individuality of life is on the basis of principle. Principle at an individual point of calculation, one way of how principle expresses itself as a whole. You see, principle expressing itself as a whole. This is the individuality of life. And principle is infinite, and therefore expresses itself in infinite ways, and so has infinite individuality. This seems to be contradictory. It's hard for the human mind to grasp that, how individuality, which seems to be one way, one thing, can be infinite. Only on the basis of a principle is this possible. So that's the field, the tonality, generally speaking, of the fifth day. And what do we have as our epitome? Life individualizes infinitely through the multiplication of ideas. And life as mind, life is metaphysical. See how it falls back on principle. Life falls back on that metaphysical system, a system of light that we've looked at. So life is metaphysical, ideational. Life is of the constitution of idea. It is made up of idea. Its basis is idea. So we can begin with that first part of the text of the fifth day. And God said, let the waters, here is your second day, bring forth abundantly. That abundance is the individualization of life. Do you know that? Huh? Those that have studied the synonyms consecratedly and deeply know that abundance is not so much having enough to eat and enough money in the bank and a good job and all the things that as early fledgling Christian scientists we consider to be abundance, but that abundance is the infinite individuality of a principle. To be one with a principle, and this is so in any field. If you want to think of any discipline, where does the sense of the fullness come in any discipline? Only as you know the principle of that discipline. If you know the science of music, there's no end to the expression, right, of those fundamentals, of those categories. You know the categories. They can relate to themselves without end, as we've seen in principle. That relating is bringing out the infinite individual forms of the expression of that principle. This is the abundance of that field. So you have abundance in every field, any field that's been able to crystallize and set forth its constituency in a science as categories, and the right way of relating those categories in any field, you have the abundance then of that field. And this has to do with progress. This is where progress comes from, isn't it? That you have a continually new relating of that which is set, those categories that are set for the field. The categories don't change. They are self-organized. They have been organized. The principle has shown itself forth in its self-organization, and when those categories relate to each other, they bring out the periods of progress. They bring out the abundance. They bring out the infinite individualization and individuality within that field. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Yeah.
So I took from a teacher principles of drawing and painting and all, and he told us that it was an exact science, and you learned color and harmony and all that. It was scientific fact, and the art part was what you did with those principles. And I've never forgotten that. And then with you sharing that just gives you the rejuvenation of your battery to be as creative as you possibly can. Because you have a lot of ideas then with those principles. You could
Yes.
paint or write or whatever you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's have a break at this point.